Hi, everyone, and welcome to Adventures in Streaming with Coastal Carolina University, University of Massachusetts at Boston, and Loyola University of Chicago, here for the Charleston Conference 2023. Next slide. To meet the speakers, I'll hand it off to my colleagues.
Hi, I'm Todd Ricks, Collection Strategies Librarian at Coastal Carolina University.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Smith. I'm the Collection Analysis and Development Librarian at the University of Massachusetts, Boston.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Martin. I'm the Head of Access Services and Interim Assessment Coordinator at Loyola University Chicago.
And I am Emma Covelli. I'm the team lead for the Content Workflow Analyst team at Kanopy. Next slide.
Let me just introduce what Coastal is. Coastal Carolina University is a medium-sized, about 10,000 FTE doctoral granting state-funded university near Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I have been there since March 2022. CCU started with Kanopy, the standard PDA program way back in 2018, and I have previous experience at another institution back to 2016 after an ALA, really interesting ALA presentation. So how it works at Coastal is all titles are loaded into a discovery platform. Back at the beginning, the early days, it was EBSCO Discovery Service, and then currently it's the Ex Libris Alma Primo platform. And 4 views of 30 seconds or more in a quarter triggers a 1-year license. So you set a soft, what we used to do, both institutions, we would set a soft budget limit, and that would stop auto triggers. And we had a very similar experience at the small school I was at, where we set a budget. I introduced it to new faculty. The new faculty get excited about it. At the beginning of the school year, you have this back to school meetings, and they would blow right through the budget. In fact, the first year we had about a $3,000 budget, and they blew through it by Labor Day. It was gone, so we had to shut it off. So that was fun. And ironically, one of the biggest culprit of that is it actually followed me to Coastal Carolina. So we have a good. He's still licensed the same videos. It's really funny. We all ended up in the same place. So as probably you're well aware, faculty and students love the Kanopy platform. The content is perfect for a lot of courses. It's an attractive platform. It runs well. The apps work well. And at Coastal, we had a pretty good kind of unsustainable run of spending there. As you can see, the last full fiscal year before we switched to Smart PDA was about $45,000 a year. So enter the Smart PDA program. What is Smart PDA? It's a curated collection deduped from other streaming vendors. You basically, let me move forward here a little bit. You work with a content workflow analyst, which is what Emma is. We have a guy named Cody that works with us to set a base budget based on your average annual license spend. And then you upload different collections of videos from different vendors, and they work with what your subject areas are, and you basically curate the collection. You take some titles out of your PDA list. And so for us, it was about 1,500 titles or so were pulled from the PDA collection. That doesn't mean they're completely gone. They're not automatically available, but they still can be requested, which we'll talk about in a minute. The great thing about this whole process is the complete transparency. I don't think another vendor, we've never had vendors that are this upfront with what your spending is, especially in a PDA program like this. And they give you very detailed quarterly performance reports. And this is a screenshot from the most recent one I got a few weeks ago. And it kind of steals my lead, kind of gives away the plot here, but you can see the red line in that center, the big budget versus spend. It's gone down quite a bit. So that the blue line is our budget. And we've done very, very well with reducing our spend on annual licenses, as you can see. And you can see there's 7 more screens of information with different vendors and how much per vendor and title usage and purchase requests. It's been really very useful. So how it's going? We've saved substantially over the last year or so. We started in May of 2022. And so, which is really late in the fiscal year for us. We run on a July to June fiscal year, so that was kind of tough to make a one-to-one comparison. But we've had a full year plus, and we've saved that first full year about $23,000 in annual licenses, which is a lot of money for us. Of course, there are pain points like everything else. Some titles, like I mentioned before, have to be added to the PDA. And that's a very straightforward process. You do get irritated faculty who don't check to make sure the videos are their videos are available, and that's that annual, license cycle where they'll request it for a certain assignment in the middle of the semester, say right around now in October. We license it, or that gets triggered. A license gets triggered for a year, and then it expires right before they need it again the next semester, the next year, the next time they teach the class. Despite telling them to check access and to work with their liaisons to make sure it's available, they don't always do it. But that has gone down as they've gotten used to this new system, so that works out for everyone. But basically, a patron will get to a film title page, and they can request it via email, which is very simple. I just did one this morning. They still can find the videos via the Kanopy platform, or they're still loaded in our Primo discovery platform. So they find that, they just fill out the form. And there's a couple different things you can do with that. We automatically add the title to the PDA program, so they can, that sets the triggering, the plays that get the trigger for the automatic license after a year. But you can decline it, you can delete it, or you can do just ignore it, and that works for us. We just add it to PDA, and it's been very successful for us. Very few irritated patrons, especially the second full year that we've been doing it. We had about 205 titles requested over the year. That's 205 separate emails to myself and my supervisor, and we just work through those manually. And only 40% of those roughly triggered a license. So that's actually a really good ratio, I think. So what's in it for Kanopy? So what they would like you to do, and this is what we've done, is we've turned savings into perpetual license purchases. We basically have purchased perpetual licenses, and there's no access fees. That's something that's relatively new. I think originally there were annual access fees, but now they've waived those. So if you see sometimes in the literature, it will say, in the documentation, it will say there's access fees, but to my knowledge, we have not been billed for such unless they've changed that. So it's a really good thing. And obviously it drops what your spend. Every time you purchase, you're not rebuying those next year. And obviously happier customers. So that's how it worked for us. We're very, very pleased with the program and recommend it. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to tell you about our experience at UMass-Boston. UMass-Boston is an R2 institution, around 13,000 FTE, located in Boston, Massachusetts, of course. Our experience is fairly similar to CCU's, but I just want to focus on some different points. Next slide, please. So kind of to provide you the broader context of what our kind of goals around streaming video, provision of streaming video to our patrons, we want to provide stable, reliable, and expansive collection of streaming videos in support of the teaching, learning, and research across the university. So we do see this as streaming video as a key component to the university's mission, as much as journal literature databases or books and ebooks. But our specific objectives have been, over the past few years, have been to stabilize the cost, both annually, that is, when we budget for it in one fiscal year, we want to meet that budget target, and long term. And as Todd mentioned, going from one year to the next, the costs can grow, outpacing inflation tremendously, and we want to keep that to a minimum. We do want to maintain access to all the relevant content. That is, we do want our patrons as much as possible to have direct access to the video content they need. But we do want to remove duplication and overlap across platforms. That is, we don't want to be paying for the same content twice from two different sources. We also want to remove non-academic content, that is, things for leisure or recreational viewing, as much as possible, identify that and not be paying for it. At the same time, we want to keep user barriers to the minimum, that is direct access for faculty and students, And we are a very small staff, so we want to keep the administrative overhead to a minimum in terms of manual gatekeeping and mediation. So next slide, please. So Kanopy within the context of UMass-Boston, we have had a long-standing Kanopy unmediated and then capped PDA program, and our first Kanopy purchases go back to 2013. We also have a number of subscription collections, including Academic Video Online, Films on Demand, Jove, the Media and Education Foundation collection from Kanopy. We do also purchase individually licensed film, mostly from Swank, but also from individual producers and occasionally from ProQuest, Alexander Street Press. And one thing that's kind of important about our context is that the Boston Public Library makes their e-collections available to all students registered within Massachusetts, and so this is a great source of for recreational viewing, as for recreational reading and everything. It's we do kind of rely on them to some extent to serve that purpose for our community. Next slide, please. So through July 2020, we were on a capped PDA program from Kanopy, which was, again, the Kanopy would estimate our expenditure for the year and would cap it at that. And we generally, over the years that we participated in the program, we were meeting those caps. The pros, the range and quality of content. That is, it contains motion pictures, including indie films, Criterion collection in particular, but documentaries, counseling videos, all sorts of a wide, diverse range of content, much of it available from nowhere else. It has faculty recognition, and they generally like the functionality. They generally prefer the video quality over some of the other sources. In some ways, to me, Kanopy is sort of becoming the JSTOR for streaming video. Faculty are often going directly to the Kanopy platform to look for things, which can cause its own set of problems. The cons for us have been the increasing expenses up through 2020. That is, the first year we did capped was 2017. It went from 25,000 to last year for the capped. In 2020, it was 91,000. Other is there, with the capped PDA, there was no way really to control for overlap with other collections, content from other sources, which was generating a needless expenditure. And then also, again, we weren't able to sort of weed out the recreational videos. So this was things being triggered mostly by students that just wanted to watch things during the holidays or on a Tuesday for fun. Next slide, please. So in September of 2020, we Kanopy enrolled the Smart DDA. We were an early adopter, and it was a great opportunity for us. For the first year going into it, it was going to be level cost with what our CAP PDA program had been in the previous year. And Todd already touched on this, but our track record with Kanopy kind of proves that they were quite adept at projecting the budgets both on a monthly basis and and across the year. So we had a lot of confidence going into this about those about the budget they had provided. The Smart DDA gave us three options for managing content. One was basically what I'm terming the visible content. That is the titles that are included in our DDA program. Faculty and students have direct unmediated access to this, and we're putting the records for this in our discovery layer. There's also the body of mediated content. It's not in our discovery layer, but users will see it if they go into Kanopy and search. They can request directly through a Kanopy form, and then, as Todd touched upon, the library does approve that. It is a manual process. The mediated content was largely for the low value titles, what largely seemed to be the recreational viewing. And then there's the excluded content. This is generally the overlap with other sources, particularly with the content from Avon. It's not discoverable within Kanopy. That is, if the users search for it, they won't see it, and it can't be requested. Manually, the staff, we can add these films back into either as mediated or visible, so it's not locked out for good. So as I mentioned, excluded is the overlap with the other collections. We sent that list to Kanopy, and they deduped it. The mediated were the low values, and this has been identified both by titles and suppliers, which I'll get into in a minute. And of course, the categories are dynamic. Next slide, please. So one of the things I want to look at is how this affected our the suppliers, that is the different distributors or kind of rights holders for the films from the last year of our CAP PDA program to the most recent year of our SMART DDA. And the top suppliers have largely remained the same: the Criterion Collection, Kino Lorber, Psychotherapy Net, etc. However, there's three that I think are worth kind of calling out as examples to show how the SMART DDA has affected the use of that content. PBS dropped from our number one PDA triggered content with over 75,000 minutes viewed to 9.7. This is an example of content that was largely excluded because much of it was available from Avon, much but not all. And we ended up with this, we excluded, of the approximately 1,500 titles from PBS, we excluded all but about 30 of them. So those 30 are very important, but most of the PBS is now being available from another source. First run features dropped from number 9 to 16, and again, that was largely, most of these films have been moved to mediated because they were low value and considered most likely being viewed for recreational viewing. That is, these are kind of motion pictures. The great courses dropped from 5 to number 27. And again, this is, some of these were excluded. There was some overlap from other sources. Many of them were mediated because we found that they were being low value. And when I looked at the titles, it was clear that kind of students and maybe faculty too were using this more as infotainment rather than being connected with specific courses. And comparing just the number of how much sort of exclusion and mediation we've done, it's reduced the overall number of suppliers from 412 with views to 166. And you can see the numbers with just a single play are much lower. But one thing about it that's interesting is we still have a lot of videos. This doesn't mean it's just a few, the content's coming from just a few suppliers. We're still getting it from 166 suppliers. And once you get outside the top 10 or 20, it's mostly just one or two films being viewed from each of those suppliers. So it's still a diverse amount of content. Next slide, please. Entering our fourth year into the PDA program, the takeaways: excellent analytics. Todd showed you examples of reports. The work that the staff does is fantastic, but also what's available through the admin dashboard is excellent. We've seen a reduction in overall cost, assisted by purchasing of perpetual rights, both from Kanopy and from other sources like PBS. The administrative interfaces continued to improve and allowed things to move much more quickly and become much more dynamic. It's really, really just become outstanding. And Kanopy continues to work with us to identify low-value content and to make changes to our portfolios across that visible, mediated, and excluded ranges for continued, to continue to provide high value. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk about our experience with Smart PDA at Loyola University Chicago. Just for sake of context, we have about 17,000 FTE right now across 4 campuses in the Chicago and Chicagoland area, an international campus in Rome. Next slide, please. So there were a few things that led us to try Smart PDA, and we were, I think, the first or the second institution to join in early 2020 as a pilot member, part of the pilot program. So one was that even before 2020, we were seeing high year-over-year usage and spending increases. So similar to what Todd mentioned earlier, we were operating under a soft budget, fairly unmediated model. But we were seeing in one case over a 3-year stretch, we were literally doubling usage growth. And so when the pandemic hit in 2020, then that's when we knew we were going to have to make a change. So that FY20 period exacerbated spending. So we actually, and I looked at this a little bit yesterday, we had a bunch of angry emails even before we shut down our campus because we had to go to full mediated and eventually turn off any triggers. And that was because we had completely blown our budget. So what led us to talk with Kanopy in March 2020 was to try to figure out a model where we could continue doing licensing, but do it in a way that was going to actually be feasible for us. So, and then also just looking long term, we needed a greater sense of cost control and multi-year sustainability. I mean, obviously, at that point when COVID hit, it was really difficult to tell, what the future was going to bring. But even when things sort of got to be a little calmer pandemic-wise, like we were still looking at having like a multi-year sustainable model. And then we also wanted to streamline our acquisitions workflows. So at the time, we only had one person really controlling the ordering process. I would pitch in an emergency basis, but it wasn't super ideal. I didn't really have a strong sense of what I was doing. And so we wanted to make the process a little bit simpler for just redundancy purposes too. Next slide, please. So once we joined Smart PDA and like pretty much immediately in that first year, we saw a cost reduction. But from a year-to-year standpoint, now with us going through 4 years, you see like from a cost per use standpoint. So prior, like we were averaging 70 cents per use, and it went down. So we saw pretty much an immediate reduction throughout the remainder of calendar year 20. So our fiscal year runs from July 1st to June 30th. So we had a little bit of a benefit in late 2020 there, but then in CY21 and CY22, we continue to see a reduction. When we ran these numbers, Kanopy ran these numbers at the end of July of this year, we were up a little bit usage-wise, but we're expecting for throughout fall of 2023 semester for that number to continue to lower. And growth-wise, we were down some in usage last year, fiscal year, which I'll explain in a little bit. But this year, it seems like things are ticking up a little bit. So expecting that we'll see some more cost savings this fiscal year too as well. Next slide, please. So some of the additional benefits that we've seen from Smart PDA too. So and again, this goes to what Todd and Steve have both kind of noted. Cost predictability has been really big, so it's allowed us for some other licensing opportunities. In our case, we've been able to do a couple of subscriptions too, which I'll mention more here in a little bit, and been able to seek perpetual licensing, and also just had more money in general for streaming collections outside of Kanopy as well. So one thing to note, a change that we made in the middle of last fiscal year, beginning of last fiscal year, is that we went to a full digital model. So we are no longer buying DVDs. I made that decision so that we could have more money to use towards not just Kanopy, but other collections too as well. And so it's not just help for Kanopy collections, but also just for our entire streaming visual media model. So this is a self-sustaining model. So, from a fiscal standpoint, and also just from, like an overall daily management standpoint too, we have a pretty good sense of what our gray listed and blacklisted titles are. And in general, what we've done is we've tried to find ways to expand our PDA pool from gray listed titles and new titles as things pop up, and we continue to run a budget surplus with what we've been tracking. So, from a workflow standpoint, Add to PDA has helped provide for addition of non-pool titles. So some of that we do with Emma as our content workflow analyst. But some of it I'm also able to add on a title by title basis, based on recommendations from faculty and just titles that I see fit to add. So with our expired licenses returning to PDA, that's a big plus too. So the before PDA, when a license expired and we were doing just straight 1-year licenses, like we would have to try to track what was expiring, and we would get faculty who would be angry because they would forget that something or wouldn't know that something would expire after a year. And so with things returning to PDA, it's made it a lot easier, especially for high use titles where faculty can use a title, over the course of several semesters repeatedly, and they know it's going to be there, we know it's going to be there. So a big one too is that we can track all of our purchases against our budget. So what this means is that, and we did this again recently within the last several months, is that we have enough of a surplus now that we can not just do our PDA usage against our budget pool for the year, but we can also take our subscription money out of that pool and money for perpetual licenses too. I don't know if that's going to be what we do for the next several years, but at least for right now, we have enough of a surplus that we can take everything out of one pool. So that simplified things from an acquisitions and budget management standpoint too. So, and then again, as I mentioned, faculty, students, and staff, they know what content and titles to expect. And so it's made the dynamics with them a little bit easier too as well. Next slide, please. So our current status within Smart PDA. So again, stable collection. We have high value and previously licensed titles with the ability to add more via new titles and Add PDA. So similar to what Todd and Steve mentioned, so we're seeing, Criterion Collection, PBS, Kino Lorber, like those packages in general are the ones that tend to get the highest use. There tends to be some year-to-year changes. I think right now Criterion is our number one. But we've also seen, California Newsreel and some others, be within the top 5 to top 10 too as well. So from a perpetual license standpoint, so given our savings, especially during under budget months, we can identify licenses with 3 or more years of consecutive PDA triggers, and then seek perpetual licenses for those too as well. So as Steve mentioned, I wish that we could do that for Criterion Collection, but we are able to do that for a lot of really important titles, and know that we can secure that, long-term. Ongoing questions and issues. We want to continue to add more PDA content to encourage usage. And this is something we're actually working on with Emma right now, where we need to identify some more titles to add to the pool. And then also just making adjustments if our usage is leveled out long-term. I'll mention this a little more here in a second, but we've seen a drop from the pandemic period. And so now the question over the next year or two is seeing what usage is going to be like, especially relative to our other streaming media collections. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of like what we're looking at in terms of like our streaming media packages. There's a lot here in the other packages section that I don't mention. That includes DocuSeek. We started self-hosting titles in the last year. And we have some other smaller collections, Drama Online, and such. So, but from a usage standpoint, so I track plays as the basic measure, like across all our streaming media collections. And so Kanopy by far is our where we get our largest amount of usage. And then we also lean heavily on Alexander Street Press and Swank. Swank for popular and Hollywood titles, Alexander Street Press for some educational titles too, and a little bit of popular titles as well, content that we don't have in Kanopy. We do try to avoid overlaps between those two collections in particular. We recently started trying to track plays from Jove and Sage for medical and science content. So I'm curious to see what that's going to be like from a year-to-year basis. And then also I want to mention with Kanopy too, like within Kanopy from a year-to-year usage standpoint, we also look at played minutes. And so 22,000 uses in FY23, that was actually down from 28 something in FY22. But from a played minutes standpoint, I think usage in FY22 was around 725,000 played minutes, and usage in FY23 was around 700,000. So like minutes per use or minutes per play engagement was actually up quite a bit in FY23. So that's something we try to bear in mind too as well.
Okay, next slide, please. So what is the Smart PDA program and who are the CWAs? The CWA team is made up of MLS degreed librarians and professionals with hands-on experience and expertise in collection development and acquisitions. We've all worked in academic libraries in various capacities, and we're all dedicated to our Smart PDA program partners' successes. The Smart PDA program was created in response to increasing demand and need for budget sustainability. This was done by incorporating various elements of our rich analytics to inform program curation, budget management, and budget utilization management strategies, like the monthly budget targets that my co-presenters have mentioned. Historical analytics, peer institution data, and curricular content alignment all play part in how curation of a Smart PDA program is developed. And in partnership with a CWA, you're guided through the data available to determine an initial curation setup that works best for you and your campus community. In terms of budget utilization management, licensing history is considered to scale your overall budget to these monthly budget targets that have been referenced. And these monthly budget targets consider slower and heavier historical licensing activity by month to help establish the target budget allocations that we measure the Smart PDA program performance against. After that, the program is then monitored and managed by a CWA team member, and the CWA is in regular communication with you to keep you apprised of your program's performance and any actions needed to maintain a successful PDA program. CWAs also keep you up to date with new and changing content opportunities to explore, such as new titles, new suppliers, and changing content that may expand upon your streaming collection scope and curricular needs. CWAs keep you informed on how your PDA activity aligns with other program offerings available through Kanopy so that multiple licensing models can be incorporated into your overall Kanopy relationship. Like Chris mentioned, they have the Media Education Foundation subscription through Kanopy as an example of this. This really maximizes the content available to your users and encourages the smartest use of your streaming budget. Next slide, please. It's been about 4 years since the SMART program started, and Kanopy now has over 150 academic institutions partnered with us on this program, and the count continues to grow. Our partnerships with academic libraries and librarians, such as my fellow co-presenters here, continues to grow as well. And these partnerships help scope the vision of what a data-informed curated streaming film PDA can be in the future to best support academic library needs. And really on a broader scale, these partnerships continue to help scope what an ideal library acquisitions model and strategy is for collecting streaming content. The Smart PDA program, as you can see here, has demonstrated some successes with our partners. More than 95% of Kanopy's Smart PDA partners have stayed within their annual budget allocations. Those that did not, which is very few, were apprised at the first sign of risk and consulted on different ways to realign available content so that licensing activity remained within budget. Other partners chose to dedicate discretionary funds to increase budget to support that demonstrated demand. So instead of removing content, they just added more funds to be able to support the demand and not interrupt content expectations. But the majority of our customers, again, remained within the annual budget, demonstrating a great success. Our renewal rate is another great number. It's 99%. Once a library starts the SMART program, the successes and benefits that it's demonstrated has led to long-term commitments with year-over-year renewals occurring for most of our partners. Average cost per use is decreasing, as Chris highlighted in his portion as well, when coupled with the budget and content customization that the SMART PDA program offers. Our partners are also discovering new opportunities to leverage and maximize their streaming budgets by exploring other Kanopy models to use, like perpetual licensing, 3-year licensing, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. SMART PDA supports an improved workflow, and launching a SMART PDA program can require a bit of time in reviewing curation suggestions to determine alignment with collecting scopes for streaming. Depending on the volume of mediation involved, there can also be a time commitment on the library's end to review and follow up with these requests for mediated content. And there's also a time commitment required to review the performance reports that have been mentioned by my co-presenters here and collaborate with your CWA if budget is challenged or content needs to change. It isn't unusual for programs to be light touch either, with flexible program setups operating perfectly within budget off the bat and meeting all content needs with infrequent adjustments to address things like course reserve needs and individual title requests. There's really no perfect formula for setting up a SMART PDA program, but our data-centric and collaborative efforts have been really successful to date. Only a small fraction of programs have required minor adjustments to better align licensing activity within budget, but otherwise have been very successful. And we've noticed that the SMART program also opens up opportunities to leverage more functionality within your Kanopy admin. In the My Titles section of your Kanopy admin page, it lets you filter, export titles and their statuses in your program setup and lets you expand access to content on your own with the Add to PDA functionality as pictured in the screenshot here of the My Titles title requests section of your Kanopy admin. While the volume of title requests significantly varies based on institution type and size, and also the level of curation that's in place, we find that 11 requests per month is the average that our SMART PDA customers experience. If mediation workload and workflow is a concern and you don't want to work with any sort of mediation, that's perfectly fine too. It's not unusual for some of our SMART programs to have 0 mediation and only have content available in PDA. That's been selected. In addition to the Add to PDA function and the title request tab that you can see pictured here, there's other ways to modify your curation on your own title curation tab as well. The filtering and exporting can be done self-serve, and your CWA is always available to assist. Next slide, please. As you can see, the SMART PDA program is a true partnership between vendor and library. The CWA team is dedicated to the SMART PDA program success, and alongside your account executive, we provide all the support you need with your Kanopy account. The support and understanding that we build and develop while you're on the SMART PDA program ultimately leads to maximizing content availability to your campus communities as well. We learn and understand your streaming collecting scope and collaborate with you to ensure that our valuable streaming film content is available and accessible to meet all of your user needs across all disciplines. This allows Kanopy to serve as a research resource, a supplemental resource to print and lecture material, and a personal enrichment and awareness resource for all. So with this firm foundation of demonstrated budget sustainability, streamlined workflows, and collaborative data-informed analyses of programs, Kanopy's SMART PDA program is truly an adventure you don't want to miss. Next slide. And I just want to close off by saying thank you to everyone. Thank you to my co-presenters. Thank you to everyone watching.